and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and today I am joined by Steven from the brand Euphorium Brooklyn. Thank you so much for inviting me out here. It's been a wonderful, wonderful time so far. A lot of really great brands here. But of course, if you take a look at what we have in front of us here, it's such an interesting display. Maybe we can zoom in on some of the bottles. And it has this sort of rustic, antique vibe to it. And I have a little bit of experience with Euphorium Brooklyn, and some of these are personal favorites of mine. I love Chocolato, I love 100 Tweeds, and recently I discovered Vault. It's going to be released in a alcohol concentration this time, and I think it's such a great sort of woodsy, resinous fragrance for the winter time, and it's evocative of the holiday season for me at least. So I was wondering, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind me asking you a few questions about the brand.
Sure, please.
Yeah, so first things first, whenever I think of Euphorium Brooklyn, I think of euphony, meaning like good sound.
Cool, okay.
And knowing your background in music, I thought, is there a correlation there, or where does the name Euphorium Brooklyn come from?
That's a really awesomely appropriate tie-in, and I have never thought of euphony until you mentioned it right now.
That's awesome.
Actually, that's crazy.
That's cool.
For me, it was tapping into euphoria, and in the story with my perfumers, started this organization as very much a transcendental, sensual, drug cult society, and the perfumes were a mechanism for the clients or patrons of this cult to have transcendental euphoric experiences.
Okay, wow.
And it was, if the perfumes were a snake oil, the end result was to get you into some transcendental experience or something. So I was thinking more like a euphoria or euphoric or something.
Well, that makes sense now that you mentioned it too, because the Chocolato is very intoxicating. And it's quite for me at least, it's a powdery gourmand chocolate, but it has some woodsy undertones, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's such a great, great scent. So I also see here that we have a bit of a correlation between one fragrance in particular and some images, and the fragrance is Vital. So could you tell me a little bit about the pictures, the photography?
Yeah, these note cards are a series from Tal Spencer and of a photo series she did called the Petal Series, and I wanted to interpret her take on photographing flowers in scent, and also use a little bit of her story in the fragrance. And what I was taken by is it's an incredibly dark background, very kind of seductive and dark and moody. And what's exciting for me, one reason as a perfumer, I'm not naturally drawn to a bright floral palette.
Yeah.
So in one way, this was an etude or a study for me to force myself to embrace florals and see how I could make it make sense for me. And so I went for clusters of some of the darkest aspects of florals I could find, like orris root, that almost has an animalic deepness to it.
Yeah, sure.
And then I found it a negotiating or modifying aspect if I really amped up the sweet, fruity aspect. In this case, a pink grapefruit and honey. You know, I find honey a transition from a floral idea or a middle ground, a negotiator, between a bright floral idea and all the rich, sweet balsams that I love, like benzoin and labdanum. And so this is an expression of that, and part of Tal's story. She's originally from Israel and came here, so I wanted to use a few of these Middle Eastern notes, like a bright green aspect is a lemmy, almost like a frankincense, like a Middle Eastern bright piney frankincense, and it's it was great because when you I'm a big fan of studying and creating etudes or studies for yourself to almost force yourself to do something you're not comfortable with, because I think that's how you grow and learn. But at the same time with this, it wasn't at all torture, it wasn't laborious. I was motivated by, like, oh, I really respond and I'm inspired by her take on these different takeoff florals. So that kind of inspired me to do this super dark floral fragrance myself. And I like, most of the collection is me in a world of my imaginary perfumer friends, in my imaginary Brooklyn, in my actual loft, and it's really fun for me to interact with someone as in a collaborative way to make a perfume, because it gives you directions you maybe wouldn't go in the comfort of your own mind, or it's fun. It's a fun challenge.
And perfume transcends everyday language, common language. And my experience with Vital, I think it's a really beautiful floral. And what I like about it primarily is that although I went on Fragrantica and I saw that it's marketed as unisex, but there is this seemingly androgynous quality about it. And it just works so well on the skin. It unfolds so well. And it's interesting because when I see this picture, I notice that contrast with the almost whimsical and light nature of the flower, but also the darkness of the background. And it's such a clear translation between the photograph and the fragrance. So it's so remarkably done. So you have a lot of talent.
That's great to hear. It was fun, and with this, I guess with all of them, my process involves a lot of building up a fragrance with lots of little sub-accords, partly just so that I can focus and get my head around creating small bits, taking little bites of the whole fragrance. And if I make a convincing soliflor and then a convincing balsam, and then I can put them in. And part of that process for me is extensive testing and extensive variations, and going back and forth. And again, that's really fun to do with when you're working together, either in inspiration and in Vital. I have the opportunity to work on accords and have lots of constant back and forth with Tal as well. And that stage, like there are so many iterations of Vital before
I can only imagine.
Got to where it is now. That it's almost fun, and I save my little iterations because even if it's just it amuses me on a personal level to be like, oh my gosh, at one point I was thinking this, it's like, and how did I get from that to this? Like, it's fun, and I really think it's an overused kind of cheesy metaphor, but it really, because of that testing phase, it really does feel like a journey in that some of these accords, when I look at my my notes, like written notes about what I want to do, to where it actually ends up, is it might be miles apart.
Miles apart, right? So what would you say is the most difficult scent that you composed of the ones that we see here in front of us? If there even is one.
I would say in terms of the most difficult for people's reaction or getting their head around, is definitely 100 Tweeds. And I think with Tweeds, it's also by far has the biggest number of materials in the fragrance. There's just tons of stuff, and for me, it's my favorite for trying to develop a style of perfumery where I'm creating clusters of very similar notes, very similar materials, but they have very small, slight, maybe even molecular differences, so that one herbaceous sage idea, you can smell it every minute, and it is transitioning, and it's a rosemary, no, a carrot seed, no, it's a kaleidoscope that has tons of little teeny tiny changes, as opposed to a very traditional, clearly defined 3-note structure. And So one of the reasons why I think this is challenging is that the top note, the blast from the bottle, is a cluster, and it's almost like you mentally reduce this wall of scent that's thrown at you, and what you're able to extract mentally is how you define what the top note smells like. So it can be a little bit overwhelming, and because it's a teeny bit vegetal as well, I think that's not the easiest, rose in the basket for the.
I completely understand, but I think there's also something about the composition that's so intriguing. And like you said, maybe it's rosemary, maybe it's carrot seed, but it keeps you going back to it. And it also encourages the wearer, I think, to wear it multiple times throughout the week just to see how well is it going to work, because initially you might think it would cater to a certain occasion or scenario, and then you say, you know what, I don't know how I feel about this now. Maybe I might like it even more now, or I might think it's appropriate for a different occasion now. So I love how there's, in all of its challenge, it's versatile.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's certainly how I see it. Now,
I'd be curious to ask you, and because I don't know how it really plays out. One thing that I've imagined in my imagined consumer using and wearing it, that I go for these super dense clusters of top notes, in that I'm imagining you put on a fragrance when you're at home, and it's that first half hour is your private time.
Yeah.
So it can be pretty weird, it can be pretty dense and pretty crazy. But after about 30, 45 minutes, okay, now you're on the metro. So I like a lot of my fragrances. I like an insanely dense, almost disturbingly intense opening. But by the time you get to the office, it's kind of a little bit more normal. It's like it's out a little bit. And I don't know if that makes any sense.
it does.
To you, or you could.
It does. It transitions from personal to, all right, guys, you can come and smell me now. This is my aura, and it just, the scent really just sits so well on your skin that it almost becomes you, you know. So I do want to take a moment to talk about the newest release, which is as of October, it will be available in alcohol concentration, and that is Vol. And I believe
You got one there, I got one here.
yeah. So
I'm so geeked about this.
you don't mind if I spray this on?
Go for it. I'll take a dab too. We're getting juiced up here. Let's give some to the.
Man, that's a good one. That's great.
Wow.
Now, what's in this?
This one is I don't know. I mean, you could maybe even describe it as a avant-garde fougere, maybe kind of. It's definitely coniferous pine notes. And it's pine needles.
Yeah.
And I'm always using a lot of resins and balsams. With this one, fresh green, crushed up pine needles is a big idea
I
for
get that.
me. And so part of that is also fuchsia, and fugine is kind of a molecule in pine that leads you into artemisia and wormwood and the herby notes.
Like absinthe.
I very much wanted to do a super realistic pine forest experience. Not exactly like you're standing in a pine forest and you get this beautiful soft thing. More like you're a little bit crazy and you're putting your face goes in the dirt, into the leaves.
Yeah, it
onto
has
the
that
trees.
authenticity to it.
But it's all the notes are a little amplified in your face. And when I first released it in an oil, the oil is super forgiving, not forgiving, but it helps sustain top notes. It lets things dissipate and burn off a little bit more slowly.
Yeah.
So when I did the alcohol formulation, just by the nature of doing Vol in alcohol, pine notes, those pine, conifers, fir, they're so short-lived.
Yeah.
I really worked hard to extend the life of that because alcohol amplifies it. It's even shorter. One thing if anybody's familiar with the first release in the oil we did of Bald, I pulled back a little bit some of the smoky, earthy notes.
Okay.
And mainly to give a little bit more space to extend the pine top notes. And in the Euphorium Brooklyn story, it's Wald is German for forest, so it's a German perfumer. He smells art. He has some mental crying disease. He had personal suffering. He smells this smell from the forest, and he becomes okay. He's healed, like it's a. So he creates this perfume to almost as a medicine, as like his personal elixir against depression and sadness. And in my personal story, this is me getting lost in the woods of Ontario, Canada as a little kid.
Oh wow.
And what it is when you're a little kid and you're not just walking and taking pictures, you're picking up pine needles and eating them and breaking them and sniffing them and grabbing leaves and
your curiosity just gets the best of you.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have these very extreme, strong notes. But I had an experience of getting lost in the woods, and I started to smell a little bit of smoke in the air, like a birch smoke. I followed the smoke to a little shack in the woods, and at the very end of winter, the beginning of spring is when the maple syrup runs in the trees.
Sure, yeah.
And it was a sugar shack. So that when I got into the sugar shack, they're boiling huge drums of raw sap to make maple syrup. And then you go from the woods and the pine on your fingers to this world of smoke and maple syrup. So a mid-note that kind of comes out is I definitely have like a maple syrup, caramelized sugar come out. And I found that when I reduced a little bit of a smoky note, it gave more room for the maple idea to really come across and be not so burned.
Oh wow. Yeah, I love the story, the personal experience, but also what you mentioned with the German perfumer and how he recovered from his illness almost. So that's wonderful. So if somebody is interested in either sampling these fragrances or purchasing them in store, I know they're available at Twisted Lily in Brooklyn, New York. Where else could we find these fragrances?
Also at Twisted Lily in Brooklyn, New York. and Twisted Lily in Brooklyn, New York.
So that's the place to go, guys. So for those of you who are interested, I am going to leave links down below. Definitely make sure to check out this line. It's such a great line. There's a lot of variety here. I think it appeals and it speaks to a very wide clientele. My personal favorites, once again, are Bald and also Cioccolato. I think it's such a beautiful, gourmand, powdery chocolate fragrance that's so wearable, and it just sits so well on the skin. So, Stephen, thank you again so much for taking the time.
Thank you
and
for
allowing me
coming
to
out.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. Thank you, and hopefully we get to link up again in the future.
Soon.
Maybe answer some more questions. Maybe even jam a little bit.
I'm ready.
All right, guys, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Cheers.